everyone, and I welcome you to the first ever policy evaluation Fall School 2022, which is about evaluating policies and using evaluation results for policy. This event is organized by Asia Pacific Evaluation Association in collaboration with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Development Monitoring and Evaluation of this NITI Aayog. The communication is supported by Asia Pacific Communication Hub. Thank you again for joining us today. We're going to be here for 3 days, and today is day 1, which is about planning for results in policy making and development interventions. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we move forward. I will request all the participants to keep your microphone and videos disabled so that you can hear us well and you can see us well. Most of you have already renamed yourself, but in case you haven't, and those who are just joining us, please rename your Zoom name to your participant code, followed by first name and last name. The codes are available in the chat. Please have a look. Other than that, another very, very important announcement that the attendance is mandatory for all 3 days, and our team will be taking attendance during the sessions at multiple times. So please be available. You will learn a lot, I can tell you that, and it'll be quite an interesting 3 days. And I'm really, really looking forward to all of it. Okay. So I am Maha Salman. I am the co-leader at Evaluate Asia and Professionalization of Evaluation team leader at APIA, and it is my privilege to be the moderator for the 3 days. And this is going to be a star-studded panel of speakers and resource persons. And to begin, we have 4 speakers to give welcome and introduction. And first and foremost, I will invite Mr. Shailendra Dwivedi, the Joint Secretary, TMEO, NITI Aayog, Government of India, to welcome our participants. Mr. Shailendra.
Thank you, madam. It's a privilege really to be welcoming all the participants to this very innovative fall school focused on policy evaluation. It's my pleasure really, and gratitude to APIA for taking the lead in organizing this. Of course, to our partner BMGF and Sanjeev, who is very actively involved in the organization of this event. Welcome also to all the speakers for the first day, and most importantly, the participants who have to go through 3 days of some intense learning in what is perhaps the new normal of online education, online learning. It is a question whether this learning process is as important or as effective as a physical session. I can assure you, participants have seen the effort that has gone into production. I have seen the effort that has gone into organization of this platform, that you will not feel the difference between the online and the offline during the course of this program. I'm quite sure that you will know better by the end of this program, and you will certainly do better after this program. As being the first speaker here, as I welcome you all, I want to just pose a few questions that you could keep with you, during the sessions, and maybe find some answers to those questions. And I'm talking from the perspective of someone who is very new to this field of evaluation or evidence-based policy making. All I have is, maybe a year and a half of experience in working in this area, where, of course, we have so many, learned and veterans, who have been working in this field. So evidence-based policy making, is it a catchphrase or actual practice? That's one question that I am still trying to find the answer for. I have not necessarily found the ideal evidence-based policy making process yet. If actual practice, how best to do it now in the current context? How do you, marry the classic elements of research with whatever new data systems and technologies allow you to do in the current context, so that, well, we are not always looking at postmortems, but actually looking at knowledge which is relevant and useful while it still can be used. So mid-course corrections and things like that, which is the objective of such evaluation. How do we enable that is another question. So how do we build capacity for individuals, institutions, and systems in this process? And are judgments necessary when we are doing evaluations? Can we be learning oriented and objective and factful while not passing any judgments? Can we be forward looking is another question that you might want to look at. Can we bring in through the practice of evaluation of policies inclusiveness, dignity, hope, and focused action with a sense of urgency, so that we can perhaps look at getting ahead of the curve of challenges and problems that we face in the world today. And it is actually a tall ask, but can we convert our crisis into opportunities? Can we look at evaluation facilitating how our response can actually be of a higher level to the same challenges and crises that we have had evidence of for the whole of human history? What are we going to do with all of that? So while we have near-term predictive analytics, what about the history of evidence that we have? How do we use the two things to change the patterns of how we intervene with policies and bring about the changes that we are aspiring to bring together? I know it's a lot of questions right in the beginning, but hopefully you're fresh enough to keep some of them with you. And during the sessions that follow, you will have answers, and you will probably also find some of your own. So welcome once again, everyone, and thank you. Back to you, Madam Salman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shailendra. And I believe that the process of learning starts with good questions. And you've given us great loads of questions, good food for thought for all of us for today and for the next 3 days also. So thank you so much for your questions. Now I will welcome Dr. Asela Kalugampatia, the President of Asia Pacific Evaluation Association. Over to you, Asela.
Thank you, Ma. Thank you, Shailendra, for a warm welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are coming from. Let me also warmly welcome all the participants, all the resource persons, and also our speakers on behalf of the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association. This is the first ever policy evaluation fall school we are organizing in Asia Pacific region. And we all know that Shailendra also mentioned that we need policy evaluations to inform policy making with evidence. And we all know that our policies should be evidence informed. Therefore, people will have better policies and better life with that. So I think that we need maybe thousands of policy schools, not just one. And this first idea came from Dr. Sanjeev Sridharan that we should organize a policy evaluation school for the mainly public officials in this region, but also we should include others. So we got overwhelming response for the policy evaluation school. We got over 500 applicants, but we were able to include only 100. Actually, we were planning to have around 50, but we increased it to 100 so we can accommodate more. But at the same time, we are not forgetting other applicants. We will also have them on the last day of this policy evaluation school. And also there may be other opportunities in future. I also appreciate the partnership we have with Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, Government of India, for this policy evaluation school, as well as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is sponsoring the school as well. At the same time, I want to also appreciate great work from my team organizing this policy evaluation school. So let me wish a great workshop for all the participants, as well as we have 3 days sessions, and hope you will enjoy that. And we are looking forward to have more knowledge generated from this and improved policies in Asia Pacific region, reflecting on development in this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isela, and thank you for always being a brilliant leader and motivating us to do well. It really is a moment, a proud moment for all of us that this is the first ever policy evaluation fall school, and we got such an overwhelming response. So it is truly amazing for everyone. Next, I will invite Professor Yoko Ishida, the Vice President of Japan Evaluation Society, for the welcome and introduction. Over to you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon and good evening to all our participants. Welcome to the Policy Evaluation Fall School 2022. So we are very pleased that you are here today with us. And I am Yoko Ishida, professor at Hiroshima University and Vice President of Japan Evaluation Society. So I feel very honored to deliver welcome remarks at the beginning of this important event. So the special theme of the fall school is evaluating policies and using evaluation results for policies. This theme makes the most important point of policy evaluation. Globally, how to improve planning and implementation based on the evidence obtained from evaluation results is becoming an increasingly important issue. As in the agenda, the main objectives of the fall school are to understand the importance of focusing on results in development interventions, to use OECD evaluation criteria for critical reflection of development interventions, and to understand the importance of using evaluative evidence for policy decisions. When looking at the topics and the speakers in the agenda, I am sure that the fall school will successfully accomplish these objectives and contribute to the improvement in conducting policy evaluation and using the evaluation results effectively. Now, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, and please have useful and active learnings through the fall school. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Yoko Ishida, for sharing the objectives, and this really is amazing. We've got the focus on results, the focus on OECD DAC criteria, and how to use that evidence for policy making. So these are, in a nutshell, this is what the 3 days we were talking about. And with that, I'm going to be inviting Dr. Sanjeev Sridharan, the country lead learning systems and systems evaluation from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, India. Over to you, Dr. Sanjeev.
Maha, thank you. It's just an absolute delight to be part of this really, really fantastic gathering. Firstly, thank you, Maha. It's just been exciting to have you part of this. Thanks also to Shailendra Dwivedi, Shweta Sharma, and of course, Isela and his team for pulling this off. We had absolutely no idea when we started about 5-6 months ago whether there would be a draw, and we've been completely overwhelmed at the exciting amount of enthusiasm everyone has shown. I'm going to talk about 4 things. Many of this responds to many of the issues Shailendra has raised. I think first, as we were discussing, and I think Shailendra, Shweta, others in DMU were part of this, we were interested in a model of evaluation capacity building that really sort of makes use of the fact that we live in 2022 and we don't have to adopt older models of North-South collaboration. I was genuinely excited about thinking about South-South collaboration for evaluation capacity building, and also North-South collaboration. But the idea with the South leading the way, and I think APPEA has really demonstrated such models are possible. That's one. Two, I think it's quite important as we think about policy evaluation. How does that differ from programmatic evaluation? I think a lot of evaluations focus has been primarily on programs. I don't think we've focused as much on policy evaluation, and I'm just delighted to have Shailendra and Shweta's leadership on actually sort of, thinking of ways in which we can be much more explicit about that. Three, I think terms like results, evaluation criteria, evaluation use really requires more of a dialogue led that respects each of our contexts a little bit more. I think too much of these discussions happen in very high level policy circles, but actually getting people's stories from this context, in the context of UP or the context of Meghalaya, where we were a couple of months ago. I think we need more of such examples, and I think this provides a vehicle of it. The final point is connected to, I think, Shailendra's first question, very honest question about what is evidence-based policy, what is evidence-based programming. I think my own view on this is how do we as evaluators don't just think of evidence, but an ecology of evidence? What are different kinds of evidence needed for us to be useful, to actually help create better societies? So I think that's the promise of this school. I'm just delighted to be part of it. Back to you, Maha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjeev, and really, I would say that this was a great idea from your end to organize this, and because it's so needed, and the kind of response that we got from participants, over 500 applications. This means that everyone wanted to attend this and wanted to talk about policy and evaluation. So really, thank you for this idea. And I must say, you're also dressed for the part, man of the show. So amazing. Let's move forward. And I will not go into detail because Professor Yoko has already shared the objectives of the training. Firstly, focusing on results in development intervention, the use of OECD DAC criteria, and third is using evaluative evidence for policy decisions. So this is the agenda or the objectives of today, and hopefully we will achieve everything in these 3 days together. Next, we have a video for the introduction of participants. And like I mentioned before, that this time we're just overwhelmed. We're just, blown away with the kind of response that we got. So I will request my team to please play the video that introduces all our participants. Team for compiling this video, and now we'll go back slides and see we've got representation from 25 countries. This is amazing. So the first session of today is focusing results in policy making, and for this I will invite Dr. Shweta Sharma, the Director, DMEO, Niti Aayog, Government of India. Shweta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maha. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope my screen is visible now. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, yes, Dr. Shraddha, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Randika. So thank you, Maha. Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually a big honor to be here in such a diverse uh, audience to be discussing about evaluations and policy evaluations in particular. And I would like to thank you, each and every one of you, for joining us today. So I can see clearly for some of the participants, it would be early morning. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. So today I'll be sharing a few thoughts about focusing results on policy making. So Sanjeev is very correct when he says that we generally tend to focus on programs, and particularly at the government level, we generally tend to focus on the immediate results of a program. We really don't think about results at the policy level. But over these 3 days, hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear why we need to use a policy lens for looking at results and how it can be used to drive effective decision making. So as everyone would be aware, a policy is normally designed keeping specific objects in mind. For instance, we have policies for women empowerment, social protection, education, and so on. Each of these policies comprises of different programs launched at different points of time and involving different multiple stakeholders. More often than not, a policy is made without adequate planning or forethought on how each program is contributing to the end goal. This could be due to the lack of sufficient data, or the pressure for rapid results, or due to other contextual factors. But as policymakers, we tend to look at fund utilization or achievement of physical targets for each program, but fail to look at how all these different pathways are converging to achieve the outcomes or impact that are set out in the policy. So the question here that we need to think about or ponder is, how do we know that a policy is making a difference? So taking the case of the National Policy for Empowerment of Women, which was launched in 2001 in India, and which is currently being revised with the draft policy shared in 2016. It has 9 broad goals with interventions spread across multiple priority areas. This policy and its interventions are being implemented at the national, state, and district levels, involving government and non-government stakeholders. Each of the interventions are also directed at a specific subgroup of women beneficiaries. While the financial utilization and outputs are relatively clear at the individual level, the results at the system level require clarification. So we do have the National Family Health Survey, which provides data on the position of women on 6 key indicators, like the percentage of currently married women who usually participate in household decisions, women who have worked in the last 12 months and were paid in cash, women owning a house or land, women having a mobile phone or a bank account, saving accounts, and women who use hygienic methods for protection during their menstrual period. So this data seems to show significant progress towards women empowerment. But at the policy level, is this sufficient evidence to say that the policy is delivering results? And what are the external factors influencing these outcomes? Moreover, is this progress inclusive? And so there are several unanswered questions here. And if you look at the Gender Gap 2020 report, it puts India at 135 out of 146 countries. So clearly, we need to do something more at the policy level to improve results. So unlike program evaluation, assessing the policy outcomes or impacts requires system or community level analysis. And considering the complexity and the ambiguity of policy implementation, assessing its results can be challenging, but also rewarding. So considering the limited resources, governments need to ensure that the benefits are reaching the intended population in a cost-effective manner. However, due to the lack of evidence, policies fail to learn from prior implementation, which further dilutes the effectiveness of future actions. Hence, we as policymakers, we need to adopt an evaluative thinking to bring in more accountability for results. So here, Dr. Payton, one of the world's foremost evaluators, describes this very simply and beautifully as systematic results-oriented thinking about what results are expected, how results can be achieved, what is the evidence that is needed to inform future actions and judgments, and how can results be improved in the future. So continuing the example of women empowerment, policy evaluations could clearly tell us what is working and what is not. So from our experience at DMU, in a recent evaluation, we took a sectoral approach and looked at schemes for women empowerment comprehensively. So the study brought out important gaps in the policy as well as scheme implementation with respect to areas such as social norms around gender roles, violence against women, the need for gender disaggregated data. So this study provided us evidence for suggesting certain modifications to make the policy as well as programs more inclusive, participatory, and representative. So just to summarize this slide, policy evaluations can provide vital evidence for questions such as how is the policy operating in practice? Where can the policy be improved? What was the overall impact of the policy? Is it working differently for different groups? And if yes, why or why not? Is it cost effective and efficient? And more importantly, if we were to do it again, what would we do differently this time? So I'll not delve too much deep into this because the approaches for framing the relevant questions and identifying the appropriate approach will be taken up later in the fall school by eminent speakers here. So the next question that comes to mind is, where do I begin? All of this is fine, but what next? The short answer is by understanding the theory behind how and why a policy intervention leads to the desired outcomes and impacts for the intended beneficiaries. So here, the theory of change is a powerful tool which provides a robust theoretical basis for evaluating results in terms of measurable indicators. It starts from a baseline analysis of the context and issues. It then maps out the logical sequence of anticipated changes and the contextual conditions to support the desired long-term change. And it also clarifies the causal relationships that exist between the different activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact, highlighting the context and the major assumptions that are underlying the policy intervention. So documenting the theory of change for a policy will bring out the gaps in implementation, which can be addressed by existing interventions or may require a new intervention in itself. So getting the theory of change right will lead to effective policy implementation as well as robust evaluation of its result. So Dr. Soma will be talking more about theory of change once I conclude. So I would just like to conclude by saying that focusing results on policy making, it requires increasing collaboration and communication among all stakeholders. We can talk about evaluation, policy evaluation, but we need to create the demand for results. We need to use the results more effectively. This needs building a strong institutional mechanism supported by efficient and sufficient financial and human resources who are capable of generating and using this evidence. So thank you once again, everyone, for your patience, and special thanks to Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and BMGA for organizing the policy evaluation fall school. Back to you, Maha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shweta. You've really given us a bird's eye view of what is important in policy, how we should and why we should focus on results in policy making. You've talked about the stakeholders, you've talked about the theory of change, you've talked about how and why cooperation and coordination is important and the demand for data. And you've touched upon on theory of change, and for that we have a designated session, theory of change for development success. And for that, I will invite Dr. Soma De Silva, the former regional advisor, M&E UNICEF South Asia. So over to you, Dr. Soma.
Thank you, Maha. Let me share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, Dr. Soma. Can you put it on presenter's view?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, indeed. It's a moment of great satisfaction and admiration for the people who organized this event. It is truly a remarkable event, and I feel extremely privileged to be part of it. So I would like to thank the organizers, Appia, and then Dr. Sanjeev, for making this happen. So let me start. Okay, there's some problem here. Give me a second. Okay. So let me start on the topic that I am given to discuss. It is about theory of change for development success. Theory of change, I feel, is not simply for development success, it is also for personal success. The more I think about it, the more I feel that it is such a powerful tool that we are not using adequately. Let us take a moment to see where are we in terms of the global development efforts. As we talk about development efforts, what comes to our minds is the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are reports produced quite frequently, at least annually, charting the progress. And Jeffrey Sachs does one report every year, and this is what I gathered from one of his reports, at least the actually the 2021 report. In the report, there is a global SDG index, which is a composite overall index to assess the level of achievement of the SDGs. From a graph that's appearing in the report for 2021, I estimated the values of the SDG index up to 2021. And then by 2030, if we are going to achieve the goals, which means the index to be 100, we really have to change gears. And actually, this does not seem quite possible because it is the view of people who are dealing with the analysis of this data that we might, if we achieve, then it will be about 2092 by the time we achieve the goals as they are stated now and the targets that are set. So clearly things have to accelerate, things have to change, or we may have to change the goalposts. So this is the situation. So development efforts have not been really very successful. Can we take a moment to see what each one of us individually think is could be a reason why we have failed in our development efforts? Would you like to put in the chat box just one reason that comes to your mind? Just type in a very short phrase. Poor follow-ups, yes. What else? Unforeseen, yeah, okay. Failure to track policy, a lack of integrated approach, not learning much from the past experience, yes, yes. Corruption, perception-based policy, poor coordination, not take consideration of the context, political, funding, failing to, yes, it's quite a lot. And each one of them is true, is relevant, it's meaningful. Lack of good planning and risk mitigation, yes. Right, okay, thank you so much. Top-down project implementation, poor monitoring, poor coordination, yes. Lack of accountability and transparency, of course. All of these are true, and they're all very relevant. Okay. But then, how are we now going to know which one is the most important, one or a few? How are we going to know which one of these reasons that we must address collectively or maybe at individual country level to address? How do we know that? So all of these things that you said, they are very correct. They have their place in the overall scheme of things. If we were to put them all into a envelope and name or label that envelope, we might be able to group them into certain categories and connect them and come up with perhaps a theory. One reason that we can allude to this failure is a lack of theory in planning, implementation of our development efforts, and also not using evidence for continuous improvement. I remember a World Bank report many years ago titled "Why Poor Countries Remain Poor," and it was a very it was a report which used information from over 100 countries, and the main conclusion that the report came to is that poor countries do not learn and therefore they remain poor. So from evidence we need to learn, and all the points that you put down there capture these ideas. So therefore, what is a theory then? Now we are in a situation that is not very positive, let's say, a situation that needs improvement. And so that means we need a change. How do we bring about that change? How we bring about the change is the theory of change. And as I said before, this applies to the day-to-day situations that we face, as well as to development efforts at national, regional, and global levels. Let's take a sort of a simple example. Let's say there is a young adolescent feeling lost, not seeing a path in life. So that is a situation which most adolescents are in today, really. But a better situation would be that he is perhaps, let's say, married, a happy marriage, and he has a nice house to stay and the physical comforts, and you know what it is. So from here, in this situation where this adolescent is deprived of his many basic rights or not enjoying them, to a situation where those rights are met more or less. So two situations, one here, which is not very good, and one there, which is what it should be. So how does one get there? A very simple, obvious, common day-to-day path would be, okay, go study. Study, you graduate from school, from a university. Okay, once that happens, you will get a job. And then of course you will have money, and then you will come to this situation. So there is a, so if then logic here, if he gets an education or if he goes to school, gets an education, then he will graduate. If that happens, he will get a good job. If that happens, then he will get a good job. If he does a good job, then he will be in a position to build a nice, happy family. And of course, you might think now, this is absolutely simple, so simple that it even seems stupid. Well, yes, to some extent, and no, also to some extent. We see that this is a possible path, but there are other pathways also to go from this situation to another. And that could be another theory of change. So there is not one theory of change. To bring about a change, there could be many. And we could give hundreds of examples where alternative theories of change happen, are possible. So in development, what we need to do is find the best theory of change, experiment with it, learn from it, and keep improving so that our development strategies become more efficient, more effective, and bring results more sustainably to the people that we serve. And in this process, policies are quite important because development interventions should be guided by policies, by correct policies, by effective policies. So, and policy is also a development intervention. So let's move on and see how we apply this. A development intervention can be successful under 6 conditions. Or to put it in another way, a development intervention requires certain characteristics, 6 of them, to be successful. And 1 is relevant. There has to be relevance. Intervention has to be relevant, and we don't really have time, and I don't think it's even necessary, but I'm sure we can all understand what we mean by that. It has to be effective. When it's implemented, the expected results must be achieved. It must also be efficient, meaning the resources must produce the optimal results. Then it has to be sustainable. Let me see. It has to be sustainable, and it has to be coherent, because you can't have several development interventions with the same goals, doing the same things, or contravening one another, or duplicating one another. There has to be synergy between interventions, and of course must yield impact. Now, these 6 characteristics are what evaluators look at when evaluating a program or any development intervention for that matter, including a policy. A policy must be relevant, it must be effective, it must bring about the desired changes, it must do so at optimal costs, and it must be sustainable. It should be possible to operationalize the policy in a sustainable manner. It should be coherent with other existing policies and programs, and it has to yield impact. So I'm sure you are very familiar with these 6 concepts. They are the evaluation criteria. They are more commonly known as evaluation criteria, but I would like to really focus that they are also the characteristics of a successful development intervention. And that is why they become evaluation criteria. If the development intervention is successful, then it should have met these criteria. Then logically, if you're evaluating the intervention, you are evaluating to see to what extent these criteria were met. This is true for a project program activity, and it is equally true for policy as well. So let us take a look then at the different stages of a program. There is the planning stage. Here, the important concept is the planning has to be consultative. It has to draw from the knowledge and experience of all concerned. And then the implementation, similar way. When it is implemented, it needs to be monitored. It needs that we have to keep a finger on the pulse of the program. Know where things are not going right, and then take corrective action, evaluate, so we learn as the program or the policy or the intervention progresses, and learn from it, make improvements that are necessary, make recommendations, and then take actions to implement those recommendations. This is where, as we all know, we have failed a lot in this field. First of all, the recommendations quite often have not been actionable. And even when they were, there was no mandatory requirement, there was no obligation on anyone's part to respond to them, to use them, and to change and to improve the whole process so that results are achieved better for the people of our countries. We can speak a lot. We can take days to discuss each one of these stages of a program, but we are not going to do that now. What we are going to know is that each of these stages must be theory driven and evidence informed. Otherwise, what would happen? Otherwise, it would be some people's ideas, perceptions, maybe even wishes, and that's not going to work very well. So there must be a theory for doing something. It could be either a physical theory, it could be a sociological theory, but there should be a theory. And we should also have experiential evidence to support the way we have planned the program, the way we have drawn up the policy for that matter. And for each one of these stages, that theory must be the underlying principle, the guiding light. And people who are managing development efforts should be constantly looking for evidence to inform the entire process. So this is then one definition. Let me take this out of the screen here. Yeah, okay. Let's take a brief look at the definition of a program theory. Here's one definition. It comes from Patricia Rogers, who has worked quite a lot on theory of change. A program theory explains how an intervention, see here, a project, a program, a policy, or a strategy is understood to contribute to a chain of results that produce the intended or actual impacts. So we are looking at a high level change in people's lives, which we call impacts. And to produce that impact, we need a chain of results. For example, to go from a level of poverty to a level of prosperity, what are the chain of results that must be followed? Again, remember, there may not be one theory of change that works. There could be several theories of change, and we need to choose what seems to be the best, what seems to be most underlined by a good theory and most supported by credible evidence. So basically a theory of change in that case, as we saw with the case of the young adolescent there, it's a logic, as of course we all know. Although we know it, when we implement it, there are many problems, many issues that we need to resolve very carefully. But essentially, if X happens, then Y should happen, then Z should happen, let's say. For example, if children go to school, then they will graduate, then they will be happily married. Say, for example, in that case, now this looks like, you know, it's okay, it's fine. But truly it is not fine. Why? The assumption, there is an assumption here. If children go to school, they will graduate. we know that so many things have to be fulfilled if this is to happen. We know that if children go to school, there is not always the possibility of learning well. There is not always the possibility of attending school regularly. And there are so many assumptions between this if and then situation. And these assumptions are very much a part of theory of change. There could also be many risks in this process. And mitigating those risks is also part of theory of change. Quite often, we get so bogged down by the mere challenge of developing the theory of change, the boxes and the arrows, etc. It's not always that we look to see what assumptions are there. If those assumptions fail, then the program or the intervention is going to fail. It's the same thing in all of these steps. So one thing that we generally ignore are these assumptions and risks. They must be made very explicit, they must be identified, and they must be dealt with. So that again is a huge area where we need to have expertise. So actually, this diagram is also from Patricia Rogers. We are not going to look at each of these steps of developing or the process of developing a theory of change, because that would be a huge task. Plus, it would also be redundant because I'm sure you know about it. But I do want to emphasize the very first step, because that very step is not always considered. We jump into the task of developing a theory of change without actually going through the very first requirement of doing a theory of change. And that could be easily one of the reasons why we don't have theories of change, why we therefore don't have proper development programs. So this first step is the analysis of the situation that we want to change. And what do we mean by analysis? Analysis means first understanding the problem. And this is also not easy. Understand the problem and also be able to describe it properly. But that alone doesn't help us. We can understand the problem, but to resolve it, to help it, to remove the problem, we need to know why the problem occurs. Now, for example, we know a universal, a global problem is child malnutrition. How much have development agencies and governments together done to address this situation? Lots and lots of nutrition improvement programs. But it seems that the situation is very stubborn. The change is very slow. And still there is a very large proportion of children who are undernourished or malnourished. Let's take another moment to see why do you think that children are malnourished? First, you gave the reasons why you think we are not achieving our development goals. And we got a lot of reasons. And that's very valuable. And that would lead us to some place. Similarly, let's take a moment. Whatever comes first to your mind, we don't have to think about it. Why do you think our children are undernourished? Can you please put them on a chat box? How would I see it? Here it is. Poverty, yes, poverty. Undernourished mothers, lack of access to food, intergenerational cycle, conflicts, lack of access to assets of the household, lack of education, yes. Shortage of food, food crisis, household financial insecurity, absence of regular foods, lack of proper food security, lack of resources, lack of education, lack of food security. I can't even keep pace with it. Food insecurity, okay, like UNICEF's framework. Do you think that's a reason why? Okay. Poverty, all right. Lack of dietary diversity, yes. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, as before, ignorance, cultural shocks, poor health, exactly. All these. I'd like to repeat the question I asked before. If we counted, there would have been 25, 30 reasons that you gave, which are all very relevant without exception. They're all valid. And I can say they are connected also to some extent. If we have a problem, a development problem, in, let's say in a particular area, a village or some community, and we go there wanting to resolve that problem, wanting to remove that problem, we talk to people, and we will do exactly this thing what we did just now, because people are resources. They carry wealth of knowledge. They carry wealth of information, I think would be also more correct. And we cannot do anything for them unless we tap into that knowledge, unless we involve them in the process of crystallizing that knowledge, organizing that knowledge to understand the problem, to understand the causes. Then they will own that process, and therefore they will take responsibility to implement it also. That's a sort of a principle, as you all know, in development planning. So all the reasons you gave, this is very interesting. They are very correct. But again, I would ask the same question. Which one of these shall we address? Where is the theory then for undernutrition? Why do children get undernourished? Can we give them 50, 60 reasons? Will that help us to address the situation? While acknowledging that every single reason is valid, is correct. And this is where the so-called theory that we have been talking about comes into play. Let's get stuck, right? All right. This is what we did now, the exercise. I have done this many times with people, with villagers, with communities, with government officials. I'm sure you have done it also. So we get a lot of reasons. Now, to build a theory of change, we as facilitators, we as people who have some idea of what has worked where, need to organize those reasons so that, and how do we organize it? We have a tool to organize it. And what is the tool? The tool is a framework, a conceptual framework of causality, which means here is at the top is the big problem. Undernutrition of children. Children are underweight or stunted or wasted. Then of all the reasons that we discussed now, that you gave now, how are we going to organize them? Which ones might be the immediate causes? Meaning if you remove that, this whole thing will collapse and the problem will go also. So some of the reasons that you gave could be perhaps combined, elaborated, reduced, and they would be the immediate causes. I'm not going to dwell on this because I think you know, and I'm sure you know, but then the key principle in the building a theory of change is nothing happens as a result of a single cause. So there must be several causes, but we try to do as simple as possible. We break a big problem into small problems, components, and try to do a theory of change. Immediate causes, underneath that, there will be other causes contributing to these immediate causes, which we call underlying causes. And those are caused by deeper problems, deeper causes. So it would be a kind of a nexus kind of a mess rather, like this in real life. Then now is the time for development professionals to come forward. Is the time for evaluators to come forward. We went to the people who have the knowledge. We went to a treasure stove. They are the people who has the problem, who knows where they want to go. We now got their ideas, and they're all true and relevant, but we have a theoretical idea as well. So we need to organize this and make it a bit more of a operationalizable, I don't know if there is such a word, concept, right? So everything that people come up with, we need to listen and see what is in it and be able to put them into a hierarchy. So the second principle of a theory of change is the hierarchy. Problem, the immediate causes, the underlying causes, and then the basic causes. So the logic that we speak about is, if we remove the basic cause, then the underlying cause will go. And if that goes, the immediate cause will disappear, then undernutrition will disappear. So this is the challenge. I think we have not been able to meet this challenge very much for some reason. And that is one reason why it has taken quite a long time for these concepts to be accepted and operationalized. So the first step then is describe the problem and identify the causes. If we look around at the decisions and the policies made and the programs proposed, most of them, I would say safely, do not have this basis. They come from good intentions maybe, but they are personal perceptions largely, and therefore they are very unlikely to succeed. A passionate worker in improving child malnutrition is Urban Johnson, who perhaps some of you may have heard, who was a director evaluation for UNICEF South Asia. He was director nutrition, UNICEF headquarters. He has done a massive amount of work. He's no more with us today. This is a few decades ago, but the theory still remains. He was a pediatrician plus a nutritionist plus a program manager. So he conceptualized that child malnutrition, which sometimes is associated with death or certainly disability, can happen only if two things happen. Now, all those reasons that you gave, that I would give if I was asked, and people would tell us, can be put into these two categories at an immediate level. If a child is well fed, that child won't be malnourished. Unless, of course, the child is sick also. There are malnourishing diseases like diarrhea. A child who gets diarrhea frequently is going to be malnourished. So this is theoretical. There is a theoretical reason, a scientific reason. Nothing else can make a child malnourished. If the child eats adequately in quantity and quality, and if the child is free of malnourishing diseases, that child will not be malnourished. Now, why do these things happen? This is where programmatic interventions come now. This is the science part of it. This is the social science part of it. Inadequate dietary intake is because of insufficient access to food. Now, we can talk for days, and unfortunately, we don't have the time here because there are assumptions, very major risks here. The household food security could be fine. There could be good food in the house, but that might not get to the mouth of the child. Lots of things happen here. So it could be very interesting to see what's going on between these different layers and why are these things happening. As you came up very correctly, if a mother is not educated, in the sense mother is not aware of the development process of a child, that mother may not be able to make the available food into a nutritious meal. So that's where what you said, mother's education, the caring. So we go down to this level, we go down to this level. In actually developing a theory of change for a particular community, for example, we need to know which part of these things that are operating in that community. And therefore, our theory of change will be focused and specific to this. Now, when we say describe the problem, that is also not a very easy thing. We can just shout and say, okay, children are malnourished, they don't go to school, they don't learn anything. But what do we really mean? So the first step there is also, we need to have the problem clearly stated. What is the problem? Here, children 5 to 14 years do not go to school. So do not go to school, it's a problem, but who? Children 5 to 14 years. They drop out at 14 years. Then you have to also now, SDGs talk about leaving no one behind, which is something we have been talking now for about at least half a century, if not more. But if we are not going to leave, now in this case, 40% boys drop out, 32% girls drop out. So we have to consider that. We can't leave the boys behind while we attend to the girls only. So disaggregation of information. And we can't leave the parents out either, but parents are poor farmers and unschooled. Part of the cause might be there and children are called upon to help. So we need to know what is the problem, who is affected by the problem, where are they, and when is this happening. So once this is very clearly done, only we can go to the causes. I would like to share with you an unequivocal success story. In fact, this is part of any textbook on primary health or on demography, population studies, used to have this example given. I don't know now, but at the time I was studying and much later as well. So maternal mortality, as you know, was a huge tragedy until perhaps 2 decades ago. But now even today, it is a big tragedy in underdeveloped countries. So in this country, it was addressed in such a way that nobody expected results from that. And what was the theory? What was the theory of change there? What was the logic? Amazingly simple, really amazingly simple. The rulers at that time, for example, the responsible people, the Director General of Health Services and his staff in this case, had a vision. They had a vision where mothers don't die during pregnancy and childbirth, because we don't need to discuss here what a maternal death means. It's a tragedy, not just for the family, it's a tragedy for the entire nation. It's loss of a life at the prime of life. And it really orphans the whole family. So the risk of death and disability at childbirth was so high. Here is the change then that was formulated. If midwives are trained, then delivery is safe. Then mothers survive. Now there is a huge theory here. Why do mothers die from childbirth? The problem was the mothers were dying. Because no one needs to die from delivering a child if the delivery happens in a safe way, meaning in a clean way. So there were these midwives who went from house to house and helped the mother to deliver, and the whole process was septic. You know, they used to cut the umbilical cord with a knife, or a rusty pair of scissors. The mother got tetanus and sometimes the child as well, and both of them died. And this happened. It was almost like a 50-50 chance. So the scientific part of it is a mother dies because of septicemia. And to avoid that, all you need to do is have a clean delivery. That's all. How do you have a clean delivery? Train the midwife to do it and give the few implements to use for us. So this was the theory of change that was implemented. And there was another part of it. But some mothers will anyway have complications and might die, even if the delivery is safe, because they are called complications of pregnancy, which all of us know. For that, some tertiary care is needed. So therefore, there was another change that was needed. People felt they didn't know theory of change. These people who developed this program, I don't think had the word theory of change, but they were implementing, developing a theory of change. So if tertiary care is accessible, then complications are attended and then mothers survive. So how was this strategized then? Let's see. So we can say that logic here, if tertiary care is accessible, then complications are attended, then mothers survive. But theory of change is not one chain of causality. Theory of change is, in this case, as we already discussed, two theories, two chains. Now let's think for a moment. If these two things happen, if the government sets tertiary care, actually, let me say what the government did in this case. They set up what they call 12-bedded maternity units in every, not village, not every sort of small administrative unit, so that any woman could walk to these units. They had 12 beds, they had a doctor, they had a couple of midwives, and they had the necessary things to perform a safe delivery. But they also had a system where a woman having complications during childbirth could be quickly transferred to a nearby hospital. So the complication could be attended to and the mother's life could be saved. So that is why they set up those 12-bedded households, maternity units. But the monitoring was immaculate. Every single year, there was a report of the Director General of Health Services, and in that report, he wrote a personal account of these programs. And I remember reading the 1964 report, which unfortunately is the last report that was ever prepared. The Director General of Health Services says he intended to put up X number of maternity units that particular year. But he put up only X-1 and he gives the reason why. And he promises by March next year that would be put up. So that was the level of monitoring which made this progress possible. Okay, so this is one chain. The other is if midwives are trained, then delivery is safe, then mothers survive. So this is like 80-85% of the saving of deaths. This is the balance, 15 to 20%. Now, do you think that this would be enough? Is there any other critical causal chain? We are now learning third theory of change. Third principle of the theory of change is that you need to do everything that is necessary to attack a problem. All that is necessary and sufficient. Something may be, these two things are necessary, clearly. So simply seen, but is not sufficient. Would you like to give it a go? What is missing? Just take a moment. What do you think is missing? Now I can't see the chat box. Gender and social norms linkages, excellent. We also need to raise awareness, exactly. Contextual issues, yes. Permission of mother-in-law, yes, 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 very much. We know that in certain countries, maternal mortality was like 6,000 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. And they would say they can't go and see a male gynecologist. And because their mother-in-law would say, I had 12 children, I never went to a gynecologist. Yes, accessibility, knowledge of mothers on self, resource allocation, do no harm, cultural and traditional beliefs. Okay, thank you so much. They are all valid. And I like the one that was awareness, yes, and sensitization of husband, yes, all of that. All of this is true. Here again, now, we put on our hats of informants. You gave all these answers. I would have given some of those answers if I put on my informant cap. But let's change that cap now. Let's put on our facilitator cap or development professional cap and come to the immediate cause part of it. What you gave, some of it is immediate cause. Some of it causes of the immediate cause. They are very important, they are valid, they have to be addressed. But for this simple exercise, you may have the maternity units and you may have the tertiary healthcare available. But if the women are not able to go there, then those will just remain there and the whole program would have collapsed. Nothing would have happened. People could have said, okay, you built white elephants. Look at the 20,000 units that you built. But that did not happen because they had a truly impressive program, very cheap, not very costly, where they had self-selected women called midwives, and they I'm sorry, that is this part of it. Let me just backtrack a little bit. These two are actually connected as well. This is prenatal, before childbirth and soon after childbirth. The availability of those facilities, what the mothers need to do, what they need to know, in fact, what the whole family needed to know was told to them. They were made to understand it through a number of visits that these midwives did. Because of that, the mothers were able to access these services, make use of these services. If they sat at home refusing to come here or being refused to come here by their family members, then just or in brief, the demand and the supply were met. And so we learn one important principle here. If a problem is caused by three conditions, all three of them must be met. Otherwise, the problem won't work. Now, what you just saw there, what we just saw was a theory of change, of course, in a highly simplified way. But I think the more parsimonious or more simple, simply that we put things, easier it is to see and operationalize. Now, in actually developing a program, we have to change, we have to put it in a slightly more kind of, let me say, professional way, right? So maternal deaths caused by septic deliveries and complications of pregnancy. Why? Because poor delivery practices, inadequate maternal and child care, many of you mentioned this in different ways, and poor access to health. Underneath this, we can have another broad thing, quantity and quality of actual resources, but in a specific situation. In the situation of Pakistan or Afghanistan or Bhutan, what does this really mean? And then the potential resources. I, for one, do not believe that we have a lack, that we have a problem of lack of resources. We have resources. If I would like to challenge anybody to say otherwise, but we really don't have resources to use the resources. That's mostly the problem. Now, once we have this theory of change, because we have taken the problem and given the causes for the problem, now to do an intervention, either it could be a policy. I mean, there was a policy then to build a 12-bedded maternity unit for every 20,000 families, for example. That's a policy. The policy came through an understanding of the problem, through an understanding of the causes, and through having people who had a vision to do things for people. Okay, then once you have this, we can then turn that into something called a results framework, which we all know. Now that problem is changed into a result. The highest level result is reduced maternal deaths. So each one of those immediate causes are now changed into positive, very nice, lovely things for the people. And then you can now say, here is what I'm going to do. I have a project now to improve primary health care, and this is what it means, put up the maternity units. I have a problem. We need to change in fact, another policy at that time was to make sure that every single doctor during the internship period, he gets trained 6 months in gynecology, so that any doctor is able to give the necessary assistance to a mother at delivery. So see how policies are derived. Improved healthcare seeking behavior. There was a policy to recruit midwives, and that part of that policy was also the duties of the midwife to go from house to house. Okay, and here is some evidence, beautiful evidence. I've never seen anything more beautiful than this in my life, really. Unfortunately, the graph we see here uses dummy data, because the graph I drew with real data, I lost it. That's the biggest loss in my life, really, because it was so hard to collect this data. But this is what it says. Can you see how the maternal deaths came down? I remember the actual graph is also something like this. From about 1945 up to about 1970 or so, every single year with minor fluctuations, number of women dying from pregnancy or childbirth came down to a very low level, because all those unnecessary deaths were prevented. And if you, on the same graph, superimpose the institutional deliveries, this is what happened. Institutional deliveries went up. Actually, up to a point, this change happened. Thereafter, it didn't even have to increase anymore. In the real chart, it was like that, but this kept coming down. So here is evidence. Here is evidence that we can show to our parliamentarians, to our presidents, to our prime ministers. Of course, this doesn't say causality. Some of you might be thinking, okay, this is not causality, this is just association. Fine, that's fine. So you can do further work on this and say what is missing, etc. But isn't this beautiful? Isn't this what we can call evidence? Isn't this what should lead to policy formulations and policy monitoring? So there is one more thing to remember. We can achieve things. In fact, countries have achieved things, but not through a good process. And that is not good at all. We have to achieve, if you think of a poor process, good process, poor outcome, good outcome, you can come to a good outcome going from a poor process to a good process. Or you can get to the same outcome, but through a bad process. I think I messed this up a bit. Here you see the process is still bad because this quadrant is poor process. And here the process has quickly moved to become good. A sustainable intervention should have a good process also. So it's important to have a good process. Development intervention professionals, or development professionals rather, evaluators, have a lot of ethical decisions to make all the way through. So that has to be, I also think that actually the evaluator competencies of major evaluation associations I have seen do address this. They do highlight the need for ethical practice. But I like to leave you with an ethical dilemma like this. I'm sorry, before I do that. So a development intervention, just to remind us ourselves again, have to have these 6. We did not think of all these 6 things, but each one of these have to be thought about. Then OECD, these are OECD criteria, as you all know. But what we discussed today is that a theory of change, a good theory of change must be informed by evidence. It must be translatable into a results chain, which is then a blueprint to develop a huge program. A national development plan can be based on that. Results are hierarchical. That's quite important because there are certain strategic results if you address them. For example, in the maternal mortality, the strategic point was unclean delivery. Remove that, the problem is solved. Problem is solved. If they said, okay, because people are poor, okay, then you have to improve poverty, which will never happen, and mothers will keep dying. And remember the necessary and sufficient conditions. All necessary and sufficient conditions must be addressed. Because otherwise, if you make a cake, you need butter, egg, flour, what else, I don't know, minimum. You can't make a cake without flour. So necessary things, but if you add pepper to it, that's unnecessary. It won't be a cake. Assumptions and risks. So the 6 criteria must be met, and you cannot forget about the evidence. So that's what we discussed today. And what is the broader picture here? The application. Right now, 260 million children are out of school, and half of all children do not meet proficiency standards. You go to grade 5 and numeracy, literacy, proficiency is 30%, 40%. Children, young people come out of universities, their relevance to the job market is 10% probably. But what we want is more children are in school, more children meet proficiency standards. So we have to develop a theory of change, maybe not for this whole problem. We need to break it up into chewable chunks, turn it into results frameworks, implement. But cannot forget the assumptions, identify risks and mitigate them, monitor and correct, not just monitor by way of collecting data, evaluate and improve, not just evaluate, but improve. So this ethical dilemma is this. Here is a trolley, tram trolley coming at high speed, and it's going to go straight. Some of you may have heard this, so just bear with me. And there are 5 workers there. And they didn't know that the trolley was due to come. So here's a man on duty. He can switch this lever to change the direction of the trolley. So he can do it. If he does it, the trolley can take this route. But there's one man there also doing some work. So what would you do? Do nothing, in which case the trolley will kill the 5 people on the main track, or pull the lever, diverting the trolley onto the side track, where it will kill 1 person. Which of these 2 things will you do? You don't have to answer it now, but sometimes in development, we have to take these kinds of decisions as well. Evaluators may have to take decisions like this. Once I was called upon to resolve a problem which was extremely difficult as a result of a country program. Quite a large number of staff were sacked. So because I was in the regional office, I also had to get into the problem. So there were ethical dilemmas in that whole process. Should evaluators make recommendations that might lead into that kind of situation? So it's not a yes, no answer. it's an ethical dilemma. Okay, so I think I'm 2 minutes over time. Let me stop here. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soma. I can't tell you how impressive your session was. I'm amazed. I learned so much, and I'm sure everybody did too. This was so brilliant. You explained the concept of the relevance of theory of change and so many concepts that are attached to it so beautifully. So thank you once again for this, but we're going to hold you for a little longer. We have some more time. So this was such an interesting session that I'm sure that everyone in the audience, we have so many questions, so many comments. So I think it's time that we should open the floor. So I think we can take some questions. So if there's some very important questions that you all have, I sure do. So we can take some questions. So what we can do is you can either post your question in the chat box, or you can unmute your mic and ask the question. So let's try the second option first. If there is a pressing question, please raise your hand or unmute your mic. And if it's too rushed, then maybe just raise your hand so then I can pick and choose the participants for the questions. So do we have any question?
Maha, thank you.
Yes.
But I would also like, if possible, is not so much a question, but
Okay.
you know, some ideas, some sharing of experiences, but certainly,
Absolutely.
yes, questions for clarifications, yes, certainly, but including how do we go about this? What do you think that we need to do, if that is okay?
Excellent, excellent. Why not? So I think this would be a brilliant start. So because we have such a diverse group in the participants, so I think it'll be great if you can share an example of a similar, dilemma that Dr. Soma talked about. So do we have someone? Questions? I hear someone unmuting the mic, but it's a big audience, so I can't really see. So it'll be really helpful if you can just mention your name. So while we are waiting from the participants, Dr. Soma, I do have a question. And
Yes.
I know that you were
I have a question.
mostly... Yes, please.
Yeah, good afternoon here. I am Carlos Javier from Pakistan. I have a question, Dr. Soma, and congratulations for the presentation. I wrote in the chat that would you agree to say that a theory of change represents a history, a simple history, which describes and explains how and why an expected result will be achieved. Do you agree with that kind of statement? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very thought-provoking question or a statement. The history, let me see if I understood your question correctly. What you're saying is there a record of things that have happened before, which would help us to confirm that the proposed theory of change will work? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay. Yes, I would say yes, because without that, it would be extremely hard. How do you justify spending a lot of money, a lot of resources to plan something? I think many of our countries, sometimes with the best of intentions, start things and they don't work. A good example I can think of is the so-called affirmative actions For example, starting welfare programs to give to people below poverty line or below certain levels of income, so that they can meet their basic needs. But what happens then is that that program never ends. It creates more poverty than otherwise, because wanting to be in the program, people don't really do anything. So it generally more and more people get into the program. So it is really important what you said, that we should have evidence from previous work to show that these actions will lead to positive results. And what are the reasons also? Just because another program worked, we can't say this program designed in the same way will also work. As someone earlier mentioned in the chat, the context is very important. It would have worked in that context, but may not work in this context. So there should be very good evidence. And then, of course, once the program is in place, it has to be monitored, it has to be evaluated, and we have to learn from implementation, keep improving the program. Did I answer your question satisfactorily?
Yes, Dr. Soma, thank you for your answer.
Thank you. And how to evaluate, to what extent? Yeah, I have a question. Do you think results-based framework makes development projects more ambitious? I mean, instead of focusing on the context and problems, the tendency might be to achieve results and positive results. Please enlighten. Okay, so let me see. What you're saying is, if we are trying to do results-based development interventions, we might lose out on the context, and we might lose out doing the most important things. I think that need not be the case, because when we are doing results-based planning, management, etc., the first step is to see what are the key problems that have to be attended to. What are the priority problems? For example, if, like, head of a government can ask the different ministries to come up with problems they see are priorities in their respective areas. All of these things may be valid, but they have to be brought together into one platform, one forum, and discussed and prioritized. What is the most key problem in the country? Maybe there is no one single key problem. We might have to go sectoral perhaps, and then they are also interconnected. But then again, using a causality framework, we might be able to say the key problem is poverty. That may be correct, may not be correct, because there may be something else which perpetuates poverty. So once the key problem is agreed upon, we can break that into its components, and for each component, we can develop a theory of change, results framework, and we achieve those results. So as those results are being achieved, the country will progress from a situation of rights deprivation to one where rights are fulfilled. That's how I see it, a focus on results. But of course, I have to say this. What we are talking about, theory of change, results-based management, this is not something perfect. People are already saying what is wrong with this. We used to have management by objective, move. And there, the objective was the most important thing. So then a manager could say, okay, my objective is to grow more food. Who cares? That is his objective. But what we want to see is a change in people's lives. I can say my objective was to grow more plants, grow more food, and therefore I have distributed more paddy seeds to farmers. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. but what matters is that food is actually grown more. And not only that, that people have actually benefited from the additional harvest, that it has not benefited some rich people to become richer. So that is why there was a complete change from management by objective to management by results. So I don't think if it is done properly, trying to achieve results can be harmful, but we still may not know some aspects of this whole process. The only way to know is to implement it, monitor and evaluate. Then we will learn. Maha, shall I take another question?
Yes. So, Dr. Soma, I was scrolling the chat, and I've basically clubbed some questions so that in the interest of time, we can combine a few of the questions. So one such question that is being posted a lot is, how do you prioritize basically the causes, or what parameters, and how do you choose the parameters for theory of change? So for each context, or maybe for each stakeholder, one thing is more important than the other, right? So in terms of that, how you basically categorized basic causes, underlying causes, immediate causes. So if one person looks at one cause, they might club it into different bucket, right? So in terms of prioritization or which parameters to choose, if you can just elaborate on that.
Okay, I will try. So what you touched on, Maha, is a very practical situation also, because people always, it's human nature to bring one's own perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and with good intentions. But we need to put a kind of a shield around us so that our perspectives are there, but they are not the most important perspectives. So that is why a process is important. And in that process, the center is the focus, the primary focus is the people. Therefore, what is the priority problem for the people? And how do you determine that? I would say, who is affected by it? And then what is the extent of severity of the problem? What are the consequences of not attending to that problem? What are the benefits coming from that by addressing that problem? So these could be some criteria. Certainly, the extent of the problem is important. It could be like, a few people who are affected. Let's take an example. If you increase the bank interest rates, loan rates, then some rich business people might be affected. And governments can actually take action to reduce the interest rates. But that does not mean anything to the majority of people who don't have big fixed deposits in banks, etc. So, we collectively there has to be an agreement. The size of the population that is affected, the severity of the problem, the consequences of not attending to it, etc. So it has to be a collective decision. Absolutely. And then you also asked about how to prioritize the causes. But first we cannot prioritize, but we have to understand the causes. What would be the immediate causes, etc., etc. Then maybe we can't address all the causes at one time, but maybe there are certain causes which are very strategic to address and maybe a bit easier to address. Like I remember Jeffrey Sachs in his Paris Declaration Evaluation Report, in I think his opening paragraph, he said, let's pluck the low-hanging fruits. So there might be low-hanging fruits to pluck. And then as we progress, we can address the other causes. Of course, I don't pretend that I know all the answers. I am more a theoretical person than a practical person. But collectively, once we are on the process, we will bring out the best of knowledge, experience, thinking that we have.
So you spoke about consultation and how everybody, all the stakeholders should collaborate. And a lot of our questions are about that how can we design a better consultation process, including the government, including the private sector, including all the stakeholders or the major stakeholders who will be affected by the decision or that policy.
Yes, yes, I think it's very important. I think we have seen enough times how single rash decisions have led to major disasters. Perhaps the person who took the decision may not have intended a disaster, may have thought that that was the solution. So therefore, consultation, I think, is primary. It is also in textbooks, it's also in discussions. So whenever a development intervention is to be launched, take a policy, for example, whenever there is a need for a policy, I think there is also a practice in some countries where there are good let's say practices, where the parliamentarians are informed through briefing papers. And if you just visit, for example, the UK parliamentary website and look for briefing papers, you find 1.5-page papers on highly scientific subjects, maybe like molecular biology or new vaccines and chemical reactions, but they are written in such a way the problem affecting the people is very clearly stated in 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, and the causes of that problem, what does the new research say about it, and therefore what is the policy recommendation. So that you use the best of scientific knowledge available, but that is not enough. This is what I am arguing. That policy is for people. Therefore, we have to also talk to the people. That is why the parliament cannot pass a policy based on a policy note or a briefing paper. Parliament has to debate it. Debate it means that all the people that are involved have to be spoken to. Their consensus must be obtained, because not one person can see every aspect of a problem. The most important people to consult are the people who are affected. For example, if we are talking about a policy change for primary school teaching methods, I think primary school children should be the ones to be consulted first. But of course, there is a way to do it. Then the chances of success could be high, because you have got the best of knowledge, best of experience from the people. And then we have got the, people with thinking caps on, people with professional experience, theoretical experience, to sort these things out into a way that policies and programs can be built.
Absolutely. So one more question, and meanwhile, I just want to announce that some of the questions I'm clubbing it in the interest of time, but if you think some theme or some important point is missing, you can just drop rather than writing the whole question, just that theme or that relevant keyword, so that I can ask a question regarding it. So Dr. Soma, one more question that is popping up, or that theme that is popping up more in the chat box, is about the unintended consequences, which is like a gray area in theory of change, because so many things, real life is messy, it's complicated, so many things are happening. So for example, COVID, nobody expected it, right? So stuff like that. How, like, from your lecture, I understand that theory of change can never be perfect, or can never be like fully complete. You can't say that this is like the best. So there's always room for improvement. So how do you cater for these unintended consequences, and how can you try or make an attempt to cover as many things as possible?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And unintended consequences are to be expected. That's why we say in evaluation also, you evaluate to see what were the unintended results as well. So what the textbooks say and what experience from can say is that look for those, monitor them. Right from the word go, monitor. When you are developing your results framework too, you can identify potential areas where there might be unintended consequences. But if you are monitoring for results and if you are evaluating, then you will see that certain things have happened which you didn't intend. And perhaps that may not be something very difficult to do also. If you have field monitoring, then field monitoring is not people sending you data. I don't think it is that. You need to go to the field and see whether your planned results were being achieved. Then you speak to people in a very systematic way to see whether they are telling you that something they didn't want is happening. Then at that point, action has to be taken. It's a very good point. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we'll take one last question and then we will take a break. So one last question is, I think the one on the screen, we can take that. Can you please elaborate on how sustainability can be equally focused in theory of change, like outcome and impact? Of course, sustainability is extremely important. So if you can talk about that.
Yes. Okay, sustainability is extremely important because if a program is not sustainable, then the entire effort is mostly gone waste. No? Yes. So when you are developing the theory of change itself may not say much about sustainability. I'm also thinking aloud now, but it is this, maybe it is not wrong to say, it is the strategies that you employ which makes a program sustainable or not. So at the time of developing, there are principles about sustainability. Sustainability means that that everyone involved with the intervention have participated in developing the intervention. They have brought their knowledge and experience, and they know what is being done, and they understand and agree to why that is being done that way. So then with that understanding comes ownership, and with the ownership comes commitment if properly managed. But that alone also may not be enough. We need to set, I'm sure people in the audience know more about this than I do. We need to have, for example, the procedures, the government commitments, people's commitments, then opportunities or facilities for, not facilitate, what's the right word, provision for allocation of necessary resources. All those things must be looked at step by step. And I'm not saying that everything can be done, but from among those things that are necessary for sustainability, see that it is part of the intervention. This is the critical point. You can't wait. We are saying we are implementing the program, but sustainability needs these things, let those things happen. You can't do that. What I have seen is, unless you build that also into your theory. Let me give a simple example. For sustainability, let's say the Treasury has to provide 10% more funding for a particular program. Unless the Treasury agrees and makes it a budget line in that department's budget, there won't be sustainability, because next year the department will say we could not implement this because the Treasury didn't give us the money for this. So even if the donor gave the money, if the Treasury allocation was not there, the program wouldn't go. That's one aspect. But there are other things needed for sustainability also. So we can't fulfill everything, but at least take the key ones. So sustainability is not separate from the theory of change or the results framework. It has to be built into it for the implementation. These are not easy things to do, but things that needs to be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much, Dr. Soma. This has been incredible. We all loved your session. We learned so much from it.